You look great. We're live.
Oh, we're live. Hello, everyone.
Hello,
It seems like
everyone.
it's been like 2
It
months.
has been a long
It seems
time.
like a real long time. So thanks for joining us today. If you're watching us live, we appreciate it. We're in Lansing, Michigan, where I think maybe it's 9 degrees outside.
It's really warm today.
It's balmy today, yeah.
Yeah, better than 0 like it was yesterday. So today we're going to talk about where this came from. I think was a customer had asked us, or somebody had reached out to us and was asking, I think specifically about doing the floral former and well, how do you measure a piece, right? How do you know like what size to make? And so then that got us thinking about all kinds of molds and how do you figure out the size of a mold, right? I mean, the piece that has to go on the mold, and it can really be tricky sometimes.
Yeah, some of them are pretty straightforward, but
And it can be a little
some of them,
misleading
yeah,
sometimes,
are a
right?
little more difficult.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I do know that like a lot of times the sizes that we get, that Delphi gets, and that we list in our website and on our printed catalogs is a lot of times for the manufacturer. Am I correct with that, Julie?
It is, but a lot of times though, we do try to measure them when they come in so that our sizes are approximate because let's face it, sometimes they change ever so slightly,
And they do.
but we really do. We'll take a ruler to it. We've been known to do it.
So the thing to remember is that, again, if you're purchasing a mold, it's one you haven't used before, is it's always a great idea to wait till you get the mold and then measure it and then make your piece to fit the mold, because, I mean, we hear it lots of times where someone's like, well, I bought a 10-inch mold and I made a 10-inch piece and it's too big. And
well, the
so
same
it's-
thing can hold true for the pre-cut circles or pre-cuts. I mean, you know, whatever you want to do, you want to make sure. I mean, we may sell what we call a 10-inch circle, but if it's coming from somewhere else, sometimes they're not exactly.
Yeah,
They're a little
that's
over,
true.
or there's a little bit under. Or so I think
That's
no
true.
matter what you're doing, you're going to want to make sure. I don't know. I mean, whatever I'm doing, I just automatically measure the mold and do it at that moment. I don't just.
Probably because we've learned, right?
Yeah, we don't just set that aside and go, oh, that's a 9-inch, and I'm going to do that. I mean, you always do that. So
I do know that, like, at least one of the manufacturers I'm aware of, when they give sizes, a lot of times they're talking about the size here, so at the bottom of the mold, so not at the top. And if you look at it, I know it's slight, but it's slightly tapered, and a lot of them are that way. And the reason why they do that is because then you'll know whether it fits in your kiln or not, right? I mean, so they tell you it's in this case, it's a 5-inch, and so depending on what you're trying to put in there, the top is a little less than that. So again, good idea to measure them. I mean, you can simply just take a ruler and lay it across the top and measure it. I think you have a great way of doing it.
well, you and I
Allow
might
us
do
to.
things a little different.
Yeah, we both do it a little different, so it's
Yeah.
good that you're getting
Yeah,
both our
exactly.
opinions.
So, you know, Roy's going to be a little more exact, and truly sometimes I default to you with these really kind of weird molds that I'm not quite sure if the overhang's going to hit the shelf and that kind. And then that, I think your method works pretty well. But actually, even mine would work. I like. I will just basically turn my mold upside down and trace around it on a piece of paper. And you know, we have lots of this brown paper around here. It comes between the sheets of the glass. So then what I always like to do is cut a template. And then when the template, I actually use it and then decide if it fits my mold the way I like. And if I think it does, great. If I think, well, it's overhanging a little too much, I'll trim the paper up and then I'll use the paper to cut. And then I know that this shape works, so all I have to do is reproduce it in my glass and, you know, I'm good to go. And this was one, I mean, this is an old mold and this was one I brought from home. But one of the things, and you'll talk about, but you know, is in terms of just making sure you measure, because this one of these end flaps is actually bigger than the other. So it's not something like you could just think you could measure one end and then
Or even flip it over.
Yeah, so this is why this worked really well, and then it you know, you can see I actually did make something to fit on it, and it fits on it pretty perfectly. Because we really can't have much overhang.
Yeah, but you really want to minimize the overhang.
You really
that's
want
for
to
sure.
try to make it
Yeah.
fit almost as exactly to your opening as you possibly can, right? So
Yeah, a good example is this one here. You want to put that one back in there,
Yeah.
right? And then, so this goes in this kind of cockeyed looking mold, right? But so sometimes what I hear from customers is they're like, well, I want to, you know, I'm going to make the glass bigger so that when it slumps, it fills the whole mold. Well, that's not going to happen, right? So if the glass is bigger, when it gets soft, it's going to go around the outside of the mold and not.
yeah, and so
And not just in, right?
right,
So-
exactly. So and this one sometimes even gets a little off center when you slump it, and you have to kind of reposition it and maybe even do it a second time. This one came out pretty good, but still, like you say, people look at this and think maybe they should accommodate for that offset and make one side bigger or whatever. You know, any place your glass overhangs the mold, it's gonna slump, it's gonna bend over, and then you're gonna get it stuck on the mold, and you're gonna have to break one or both, you know, to get them apart. So
I always tell people is you break the one you're at least personally involved with, right?
Right.
So whatever you like better. So or whatever costs you more. You know, if the glass is more expensive, then break the mold.
But even this one, you know, this is kind of a
that one's a
funky little thing.
yeah.
And
Show that one.
Is it that one?
oh,
It's
it's
over
here.
there, yeah.
This one's kind of.
Is it still?
This one's a little warm.
That one might have just come out of the kiln.
and
just
this
a
one, so it hasn't
couple of
been, we
minutes
haven't
ago,
washed
so
it off or
then we
anything,
haven't cleaned
but
it
this
up.
is interesting. We're going to talk about this in a
Yeah,
minute.
we're gonna talk
Okay.
about that.
But this one actually goes on here. So, and I think you will talk about, so even this way, you know, if I cut my template and then I kind of can even kind of mirror it down, that one shows that I could make that one bigger.
Yeah,
You
so
know?
that's when you trace then, right? So you
I
trade
just
them all
trace it
down.
like
That's
that.
always a safe bet, you know, just doing that,
Yeah,
right?
but it gives you a starting point. So
Yeah.
if you're someone like me that's just really not, sometimes I just feel like I measure and then it still gets screwed up, and then that irritates me. So I just like to do it this way, so I'm visual. You know, I see exactly what's going on. But like I said, there's different ways of doing it. And you can use it on you don't have to use the exact size of your mold. Like we have this one here. So
Yeah, this is a piece that Kaylee made.
oh, cute.
Yeah, and it, I thought it was great because we hear this lots of times. Again, you know, obviously Val and I deal with lots of customers, and then you know we'll hear they'll say, well, I want to make I don't know what size this is, an 8-inch piece, and they said, but all you have is an 11-inch mold. Well, that's great. Well, make your 8-inch piece, right, and just slump it in the bigger mold. I mean, you can
Bigger's
see
okay.
actually, yeah.
Smaller is not
It turns
okay.
out really nice, right? I mean, it's got a nice slump to it.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll find that. So the molds are a lot more versatile than you think, especially when you think of, well, I don't have to make it the size of the mold, right? Especially as Val pointed out, if you make it smaller, right, it just gives you a different look to it. So.
Or often what we will do too is if someone's made like a 12-inch circle and we don't have the mold they like, we could go into a 14-inch square that's still got a slight. I mean, you could even change the shape of what you're going into. You know.
Yeah. I got a couple down here.
Yeah,
that I was
okay,
gonna show.
sorry.
No, you're fine. That maybe were size things that we're going to talk about, or shape things more than size things, right?
Right. So that's that's kind of my method. And then the one kind of neat thing about this is, you know, like I said, these are my molds, so I just hang on to these. You know, so I'll keep this one in whatever mold it is, and then I don't have to measure every time. You know, because I'm using my same mold over and over. So nice little template situation.
I like as Val pointed out, I a lot of times tend to do it a little more complicated than probably it needs to be, but I measure lots of stuff, and so since let's talk about the.
You're a measurer.
That's what I do. I measure stuff. So if we're talking about what kind of prompted this discussion was, you know, working with these floral former, this one's called, which is stainless steel, and so the question is, well, what I used to do was just really simple, is just measure right from here, measure the whole thing, and then it's all the way around. That's 11 inches, and it's got to be smaller than that, right? And so what I used to do is just subtract an inch, and then make sure that it was 10 inches. Now, here's the can be sometimes the tricky part for people. Is if we're dealing with a square, it's not so I'm not going to do a 10-inch square because that would be way too big, right? So you have to do the hypotenuse, right? The angle.
See, there you go.
Oh boy.
There you go. Here
comes the math part. So
use your paper.
So you have to measure across from corner to corner on the square, right? I didn't cut a square. Oh, I have one, right? So like if I was doing this one, right, you have to measure this way, right, from corner to corner. And then that was, well, look at that was 10 inches. That's how I must have got that. It ends up being a 7-inch square if you really want to know what I did. But I was playing around with some just to show you guys some different things that can go on. Now, obviously, one thing, especially when you're draping, which is what this is, right? So draping is going over a form. Slumping is going into a form. And so draping is a little different because if you get too hot, then the glass stretches and it doesn't make a difference the size you made it. If it stretches and starts to hit the shelf, then you run into problems. So this is one. So the difference between these three, I know it's really crowded, but we grabbed.
Here, put it back right here.
Yeah, like Kaylee will just show you there. So there's the 3 different ones that I did, and I did them actually all at the same time, in the kiln, same temperature, everything. The difference between them is just the size. So this is a 7-inch square. That's an 8-inch square. This is a 9-inch square. And then look what happens with the 9-inch one. It's hitting the shelf, and so it can't really, form like we expect it to. This one, if you look close, it actually hit the very, very tips hit the shelf. I've done these before where I've purposely let the tips hit, and sometimes they flare out and they look almost like a tulip, or sometimes they flare in. I used to have one around that was like 3 sides rolled in and 1 side rolled out, so it wasn't really what I was hoping for. But sometimes you get a little more organic kind of fall if you're doing, that's what you're doing. But again, if you see the first one, that was too big, right? This is a 9-inch square, and it just can't fall into the same shape as these because all of the glass was hitting the shelf. And to be honest, I could have fired it longer, and as I was mentioning, I fired all those at the same time, and I could have fired it longer so that it started to shape more, but then I was going to way over fire the other ones that had already fallen correctly. So I just shut the kiln off and let that one do what it wants to do, I guess. So that's usually how I do on the measuring, and we have some of these kind of interesting organic shapes like the one that Val just showed.
Would you, so you would measure that the same way?
This one? Yeah, so I actually did that with this one, believe it or not. So I measured across, I went across what was the longest part, I went across what was like the shortest part, and then from there I kind of get an idea of, again, depending on what I want to do. If I want the glass to actually hit the mold, hit the shelf and kind of flare out or flatten out, then I would make it to the length that I'm finding like on the longest part. If I'm doing something I don't want to touch the shelf, then I just shorten it. And so this one, if you're curious, so like I measured this.
Oh, I'm curious.
At one of
I'm very, very curious.
Val's not gonna be able to sleep tonight unless you tell her.
I see you're not taking notes.
I'm recording.
Oh, okay, great.
Kaylee is.
So I measured the shortest spot, and which was 11. So I made an 11-inch circle. And then so if I fired it correctly, it should have hit the shelf, which it didn't. So this is the piece, in case you're wondering what it looks like. This is one of those Delphi Superior fusible glass. So one of the new ones, the black and white.
Same with the plate I just did.
Yeah, so I thought it was kind of fun glass to play around with. So it goes a certain way, obviously.
Is that it?
That's not it.
Keep twisting.
This is great. Great live content.
Yeah,
There you go.
Right, so you can see, again, if you look at how it sits on the mold, it's not touching the shelf anywhere.
Yeah, but it can tell.
Yeah, it gets close,
Gets
right?
close
So
down
part of it's
here.
because I didn't center it perfect, probably.
Yeah.
It's really hard to center this one, I can
but
tell
I
you,
think
but it's a guess.
part of the beauty of those is they're sort of organic anyway,
yeah,
so
it's
it's
kind
not,
of unbreakable, so-
they're gonna have a little weight.
Yeah, and then this is one that I did, this is a while ago, that was a square. And I did it over the same piece, and you can see what it does. So it's, again, it wasn't this exact mold, and as we've talked about before, the molds are, they vary, even if you buy the same.
There you go.
That's actually pretty good.
That's pretty close. And you can see how this point of the square actually touches the shelf, and it just kind of flattens out, right? So when you see it shaped like this, it just gives this kind of rolled over, and it touched a little bit here. Again, sometimes some of the random way it falls, which is kind of nice, right? I mean, these kind of molds are nice too, where it's predictable, right? It's always going to look like this, but these more organic looking ones are kind of fun because you never know. You're never always 100% sure what you're going to get. So, let me just. I was going to talk about the fiber paper that I used. Do you want to do that now? Or?
Yeah,
Let's do that.
yeah, because we could do this one too.
Yeah.
And the kiln wash, we could maybe.
Yeah, do it all at once. We were just going to talk briefly because I think we've done this before, where we've really talked about the difference between boron, nitride, and kiln wash. I'm sure there's a video for that, and if you.
That was one of our very first ones, and it is on our Facebook as well as our YouTube channel.
But we're going to touch on it briefly for those of you that didn't get an opportunity to see it. It's just, in a real simple term, if you're familiar with kiln wash, right, you need to put kiln wash on things so glass doesn't stick to it. On slumping molds, we would use kiln wash. And so what it really comes down to is temperature. So slumping, we're not going super hot, 1100 to 1250 maybe a little more than 1250. So not super hot. So kiln wash on a mold like this will last, 50 firings or more maybe, right? So, but the boron, we would use that if we were doing something where we're going hotter than that, right? If we're going 1300 or hotter, then you really probably want to use some boron. Unfortunately, there are probably a couple of people that work here that don't really know the difference. And so some of the molds that we have here have boron on them, even though they probably shouldn't have killed much, right?
It seems to me that, that I know who someone was.
So, well, it happens, right? I mean,
I think that this particular person just misunderstood.
That's it. They just misunderstood.
Said,
right?
yeah.
So it's a waste of the boron.
They start spraying all the
They spray
molds.
everything, So,
but mainly castings, if you're familiar with casting molds, those definitely are a candidate for the boron, and such as those smaller ones, the jewelries and everything. That's really. But then we also sometimes, besides those two things, we use paper.
We use fiber paper sometimes as a release, and so you can see Val's got this S-curve stainless steel mold.
Here, I'll show you. And it looks like at some point someone did spray it with boron, which stainless steel is a good candidate for boron spray as well. But you have to redo it every time, and so I don't know. I just think sometimes the paper is just as safe and just as easy, and then you're not white all the time.
I was going to show you guys this one. So this is actually how I do the drapes. I just cut a piece of paper that is just a hair bigger, right? I mean, literally, the paper I think is 7.5 inches, so bigger than the project.
So quarter inch on each side.
Yeah, quarter inch on each side. And then I put it on there and run through the slumping schedule or draping schedule here. And as the glass falls, it just takes the paper with it, and that acts as the barrier. Now, I can tell you that the way this works is because I'm not going that hot, right? I think I went to 1225 degrees was the top temperature I went. So I've talked to other people before that when I told them about my paper trick, and they're like, it didn't work for me. And then I find out later they were like, oh my gosh, 1275 or 1280 or something. And that's too high that the paper really starts breaking down, and then you run the risk of exposing the stainless. But to me, I like doing the lower temperatures because you don't pick up as much of the mark on the glass from the paper that doesn't get as dull from touching surfaces and things.
Yeah.
But anyways, so that's how we do that.
And that's how it turned out.
Oh yeah, that one turned out like this, in case you were wondering how that one turned out, right? So that one, I probably was showing.
You put it on top of the mold.
Yep. Right.
Can we see?
So what is that?
This one.
7 inch?
Yep. This
Yeah.
is 7 inch square.
So this is a pretty standard size fluoroformer too. So right now, if you want to write that down, 7 inch square works really well on that side.
The 6 inch is what they call it, right? So yeah, the 7 inch works really pretty well. I've wrote about.
But it could be a circle. I mean, too. It wouldn't have to be
I had a circle somewhere, but I don't think it's in this room. But yeah, the circle looks a lot different. It's really organic looking because you get all these folds in it that are kind of unpredictable. But somewhere else, but that's good. What else? Oh, this one. Let's talk about this one real quick because you did.
Okay, and then you want to talk about this one.
Yeah.
And I forgot this one was on Kiln Post. Did you know that? Oh no.
Oh, the mold was on Kiln Post. Let's talk about that one then.
Okay.
Sorry, this was one that again was on this kind of organic looking mold here like this, and
should I grab Kiln Post just so they can see?
Yeah. Why don't you grab it real quick if that's okay? Is it okay if I tell them like how you did it? So when Val was doing this, and so she was concerned that maybe the glass would fall over and hit the shelf. So she put it on Kiln Posts to raise this up off the floor of the kiln, so that way when the glass runs over, you don't have to worry about it, hitting the shelf. So, but she did have a problem. So.
Yeah, but it did require kind of watching it because you're never quite sure, exactly when it's going to happen. And the problem when you do this, because I had that 10-inch circle is what that was. And I wanted to use it, and I was not thinking it was.
Yeah, it was
iffy. I was afraid it wasn't.
It was too big, right?
Yeah, it was going to be too big. So I did this just to give it a little room. And when you do that, I got to make sure that that these aren't sticking out. So you kind of have to strategically pull them in, so then when the glass slumps down, I've got a little extra inch or so, half an inch, and I don't have to worry about it. But what happened was it went a little too far, and it sort of came down, and then it was past the line, and it sort of rolled in. So it was stuck. The mold was totally stuck inside of it. And so what we did was we turned it upside down. You want to put it on?
Yeah, let's do it. This is what we did.
So even when you have the disaster, sometimes you can, give it a.
I don't remember, but you guys
Okay,
get the idea.
you get the idea.
So it was stuck, and so we turned it upside down like this, put it back in the kiln, and I took it to 1145 degrees. So
Sorry, I had my foot turned.
and then it just opened up a little bit, right? So that temperature was just enough to cause it to kind of come away from the mold, and then we annealed it and brought the temperature down, and then this we could just pull right out, right? So
Genius.
we
we weren't exactly sure that was going to work, but I like knowing that it worked, and so it may not always work. It would be better not to have that happen to begin with, but sometimes it does.
Yeah, you said something good, really, especially when you're talking about this particular mold. I talk to a lot of people, and people think that when they slump something or drape it, it's got to be perfect the first time they do it. And sometimes it doesn't work that way. Sometimes you do have to, refire it. Sometimes it might not. Like this is a great example of that one. That sometimes the mold is kind of deep, and the glass doesn't always go to the bottom. And so sometimes you might have to refire it again, right, to get the glass to drop in there. The same thing with draping, right? I mean, sometimes you might fire it, and unless you're there watching it, which you should be, it might not be enough. You might have to refire it again, or something gets kind of wonky on these round molds. Sometimes the glass falls kind of wonky on one side more than the other, and then so you might have to re-straighten it back up and refire it and re-slump it to get it to be level. So, but this one is a really tricky one because it is the sides are really pretty steep, and the glass just wants to fall down into the mold. And I don't know if you remember when we first got this mold, and then there was a bunch of people that work here in our office area that wanted to make one of the bowls, and like I tell you, the first 2 or 3 ones that they were making, there was like this much glass in the bottom of the mold. They were this thick, where all the glass was just running in because they couldn't figure out the firing temperature.
Right, and I wish I didn't write it down, but it, the deeper drop you have, typically, the slower you should probably go, because if it gets too hot too quick, then it is going to kind of have with gravity taking it too quickly. So if you can heat it and go kind of slow, it gives it more of a chance to actually stretch in place, which is what we want it to do.
And I'd say lower temperature too, right? So,
it was.
So what happens is, people sometimes think that, hotter temperatures, or what really happens is they have one slumping temperature and they try to do all these different things with that one firing program. With one firing program, and sometimes you have to adjust it, right, depending on what you're doing. And lower temperatures, and as Val pointed out, slower, a lot of times, especially on these tricky ones, is better because it gives the glass time to kind of fall and settle in. When glass falls in quickly is when it starts really getting kind of wonky and things get thick on the bottom.
This is kind of
it's a real fun one.
Yeah, it's fun, but I also think this is a good segue into to talk about molds.
Yeah. Joey says it's a little hard to hear us today, so we'll talk a little louder. It looks like our mics are on, but just so we know.
Yep.
You're on.
You are on. So sorry. We'll try to.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay, so there are, and we get this question a lot too, because in this day and age, often a lot of people come to us that have maybe either bought a ceramic kiln or were given a ceramic kiln, and then with a bunch of molds and things with them, and they ask, can we use those with glass? And so, the answer is sometimes. But they're, like you say, like the deeper a drop, the more you kind of have to, the more you've got to be a little careful, and it's a little trickier. But like you pointed out, this particular mold is not a mold designed for slumping. This is one where you would paint it with glazes and then do just a ceramic firing, so greenware and, so that, but this is all fired stuff. But the other part of this is that a lot of the times when they're not actually manufactured for glass and they're ceramic situations, they won't have these holes in the bottom. So we drilled these holes in this, didn't we?
I think this one actually comes.
Oh, okay. But then this one too, because you said this one wasn't originally.
Yeah, that's not a. This is another mold that is really just supposed to be, as Val pointed out, something that you would glaze and then fire. It's not made specifically for slumping glass. So the way you can tell the difference is it's really simple. Is turn them over and look at the bottom of them. So do you see how this has? I think it's called a foot. This little part here,
Yeah, this one
and you can
too.
see that one does too, right? So that it sits nice and level on your table, right? When if you've got a bowl. So you see this one. You see the bottom of it. This is like a, I think slip cast is how they describe this. So it's the walls are the same thickness all the way around. And the bottom doesn't look all that great, but this was made specifically for slumping glass. So we're not saying you can't use these other ones. You just have to be a little more aware of what's going on. They sometimes are a little trickier, like this one I was mentioning before, right? I mean, the glass wants to really just fall to the bottom because you know, if this lip was flatter and came out more, it would hold the glass longer and you wouldn't have that problem. But again, it wasn't designed for someone really to slump it. And then the holes are drilled, and this one, to be honest, the holes aren't in the best place. Where the holes really should be is here in this one. You see in the corners, this is where you want the holes to be, because that's the last place air is going to be. I mean, it does help to have one here flat on the bottom, but also the corners are another nice spot. If this one had, you know,
So that tells me, I
these
think
were-
that someone,
that maybe we did drill it.
we
or
did,
was
somebody here
possible.
drilled it, yeah.
So we, again, if you're curious, I mean, we have diamond coated bits here at Delphi that we use to drill glass, but they'll drill the ceramic also. And you don't need a huge one. I mean, the holes on all these are just fine. I mean, this is all you really need. It's just a small one. The only thing you have to be careful of is when you're kiln washing that you don't plug the holes when you kiln wash.
You can tell this one was plugged.
Yeah, look at
Yeah,
we got one that's
exactly.
plugged. So.
And this one, I'm sure I did these,
Oh.
because I can tell they're a little bigger than they probably need to be, but still.
Yeah, but they're in the perfect spot, right? Right at the right where this curves, where the bottom and the side meets, there's a hole, right? Bottom and side meet, there's a hole, and there's a hole right in the middle in the flat. Because again, as the piece comes down, it's pushing air, right? And so it can push air there. The last place is going to touch us down here in the seam, so it pushes that last bit of air out. So.
Yep, makes sense. Good.
Yeah, we have anything that has. I've got a couple probably somewhere that show air bubbles in the bottom of pieces that were slumped because the holes got plugged with kiln wash and nobody noticed or something. So. I don't, was that it? I don't know what else we have.
You found that? I mean, you want to show it?
Oh yeah, I found this one because this is another one that sometimes when people see the mold and they're like, "Wow, that's pretty complicated. How am I going to cut that out?" Right? I mean, but really, this is just a circle. I didn't make this piece, so I don't recall exactly what the dimension was. But you know, it's just a circle, right? That goes on there, and it gives you kind of this kind of really fun fluted shape that you couldn't get otherwise. Nice one. Burst like mold, I think
Yeah.
is what they call this one. Which,
It is cute.
yeah, it's a nice one. Makes a nice candy dish.
Oh, yeah.
M&Ms. That's what I think. I think everything you do is for M&Ms.
These would hold a lot of M&Ms.
That's right. Because you can never have too many.
Oh, Lisa's got a question. Can you use a mold in a microwave kiln?
I wouldn't.
I've tested it a lot.
Yeah, we've tried. We keep thinking we can make that work. The problem is that ceramic, like glass, you can crack it if you thermal shock it by heating it too quickly or unevenly, and that's just unfortunately is what microwave.
They always shatter.
Microwave kilns are they heat unevenly and often too quickly. So depending on what you're doing, but yeah, I know we've tried even little tiny molds several times and couldn't do it so that to work. But thanks for the question, Lisa.
Yeah.
And if you guys have questions, if you have questions later, you can always reach out to us. You can always email us at Facebook at delphiglass.com or send us a message on Facebook or Instagram, and Kaylee will send them to us if she doesn't know the answer.
You bet.
But otherwise, I think
Yeah.
that was it.
Yeah.
Hopefully,
Let us know any
Yeah, that's it.
suggestions though too,
Yeah.
because
yeah,
it helps.
we're going to be back in a
It's
couple
hard.
of weeks. I'm not sure if we know
I
what
know.
we're
We
doing.
don't. I don't think we do.
but,
And it's just 2
we're-
weeks, right?
Yeah, we'll come up with something.
The 31st, we'll be back with
We will be back
something.
with something super exciting.
So if no one suggests anything,
Then you get this kind of stuff.
then who knows? It's what
This
take
was
what
actually
you get.
this was actually a suggestion. It was with the floral formers, and we just took it a little bit further. So.
Yeah.
But
So,
we
yeah.
appreciate that. Appreciate it.
Keep 'em coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we'll see you guys in a few weeks. Then.
Yeah.